What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with Shannon White, another Steelers Global Perspective. I'm loving this. We're a few weeks into this show now. I love it. I can't wait for the off-season, for this show, for all things we're going to talk about. But we're still in season. The Steelers still have a chance, despite what anyone wants to say. As always, I'm joined by my mate, Shannon White. Shannon, how are you doing, my good friend?
I'm doing great. I love the holidays and the Christmas season. So I'm just a little happier and a little upbeat this week, even if the Steelers are very disappointing this season.
Do you think, let's just get straight into it. And you might see two shows from us this week, guys. You might see two guys and gals. You might see two shows. So stay tuned for that. But let's get straight into it then. It's You Love Christmas. Rudolph comes into play this week. Now, you and I are going to focus, later on in the show, maybe a second show around more of the game preview. But in terms of making that decision, we saw him enter play with like literally 2 minutes and I think it was like 34 seconds or something on the clock last week. I want to talk about the decision to bring him in. You talked about a pretty short leash for Trubisky. Obviously, we kind of found out that leash was sort of the 2 interceptions. What do you think that says? I mean, a lot of people talked about Mitch Trubisky's future with the Steelers. I don't think he's here next year, personally. But what do you think about that in terms of overall for his future? And also, does that sum up Mike Tomlin kind of going, like, I need to clean house with these players, which I personally would suggest a lot of fans would find quite refreshing instead of him defending people all the time.
Yeah, I think that, it's funny for the fans old enough to remember Bill Cowher, the way he handled his 3-headed quarterback situation when he had Mike Tomlin, Jim Miller, and Cordell Stewart. Tomlin got hurt. Tomlin got hurt, and then Miller got the start. I think it was against Jacksonville. Had a bad first half, and Cowher immediately switched to Stewart.
Yeah,
and the guy didn't even get 2 quarters hardly to solidify the position, and he didn't handle it well. Cowher, when he switched from Stewart to Tomzak, I think it took him a while to make that decision to switch from Stewart because he really, our personal feelings come into play. And he really respected Cordell and appreciated everything he'd done for the team, but it was time. Well, Tomlin has never had to experience that. He always had a franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
And he had a clear number 2 to bring in, whether it was Batch or whoever. Well, in 19, we seen how that was handled because everything was knee-jerk, but they was able to win games even with Rudolph and Duck Hodges.
Yeah.
So I felt better last year about the situation because Tomlin had experienced that in 2019. But the truth is, Trubisky has not been the answer. We talked about it last week. He is very turnover prone. For his mechanics, as 7 years into the NFL, he throws off his back foot, which leads him to throw high a lot, and he throws a lot of interceptions. He has trouble progressing through his reads. And this is 7 year. Pickens in his second season, and in a terrible scheme and a terrible offense. And it's affected Trubisky as well. But a lot of his issues are in the head and in his throwing motion and his fundamentals. So I believe that was when he brought him in was my problem. If he would have made the switch at halftime,
yeah, I know,
I would have been like, okay, you're giving Rudolph a fair chance to do something. To do it right before the 2-minute warning, you're saying, okay, you're being demoted. This is obvious. I'm setting up the next game. You're going to the bench, and Rudolph, you're going to be the starter. And I believe that Pickett really tried this week to come back. Because he practiced 2 days in a row, and he was talking like he was going to be able to make it back. But then today, Tomlin said, no, you're going to, he's not going to be active, and Rudolph's getting the start. So to me, they said after yesterday's practice, it was going to depend on how Pickett's ankle responded to 2 days of limited practice.
Loading. Yeah.
So I have a feeling that maybe it acted up a little bit, or Tomlin just wanted to end this debate and let Rudolph focus on being the starter, and he just made the decision. Now, it's probably a little bit of both. Because Tomlin could have handled the whole situation better over these last 3 weeks, and I believe they would still be in the playoff hunt. Now it's a long shot, but Rudolph, they have to see. Rudolph needs a chance to show, because Pickett has not been effective in this scheme. Trubisky definitely hasn't been able to be effective. So let's see what Rudolph can do, and because obviously it's going to be a whole new offensive scheme next year.
So 2 things out of that I want to get your take on. Firstly, I'll ask you this. Do you think if the Steelers lose against the Bengals, Pickett, what do you think they'll do, and what would you like them to do? Do you think you shut Pickett down for this year and you just go, you're done, mate? We're 7-8.
Well, the problem, I believe Pickett wanted to play this week so bad because it's the last home game.
Oh, yeah, clearly. Yeah.
And, obviously Pickett looks at it, this is my team. And, he's looking at the future, not just this season, and he wants to prove and solidify himself. But the problem is everything's going to be different next year, more so than at any point that I can remember, because the Steelers got 17 guys going to hit free agency that have played meaningful minutes this year.
Yeah.
They had a lot of 1-year rentals. So they got to decide which one of these guys do you want to bring back, which ones you don't. It's going to be a whole new offensive scheme, new offensive coordinator. I think there's going to be new position coaches. I believe there's going to be trades because, especially like in the wide receiver room, it ain't working.
No.
So I believe that I believe the Steelers are sold that they're giving Pickett another chance under a new system and a new coordinator.
Yeah.
So the rest of the season is not as important for Pickett as he might believe it is.
Mm.
Even if Rudolph comes out and they lose this week, but he throws 250 and a couple of touchdowns, I believe that the Steelers may stick with him.
Yeah.
And just ease Pickett through the rest of this. I'm not saying not, put him on IR, but I'm saying let him be the number 2.
Yeah.
Because you're really playing right now to see who wants a job.
Yeah, I was saying this. I was talking about this on a couple of shows we've done recently on the channel, and with Mark. It's like, it's just that's what it is now. And I did a show earlier in the week, 2 shows, one offense and defense, and what the Steelers are paying there. And yeah, you're exactly right. People and the Steelers need to, particularly if they lose this week, they need any guy that they think they want to bring back next year that's on that 1-year deal. They need to play them a lot, regardless of the win or the loss. In my opinion, you just need to figure out what's next. Like, they're obviously not going to go on a run and make the Super Bowl, right? We can all say that now. They're not going to go run and make the AFC Championship game. They're probably not going to go on another run to make the playoffs. So you may as well figure out what you've got. If you've got crap, get it out. Like, put it in the toilet and press the flush button.
Exactly.
Right? So, but I want to ask you the second point. You talked about 2019 then. I felt in 2019 the quarterback situation was completely poorly handled. I felt that at the time. I feel that today. I know what I personally, we joked the other day about people say they watch the tape and then sometimes they don't know what they're watching.
Yeah.
I never thought, I'm not saying Duck Hodges can't play. Obviously, the guy played won some games in the NFL. He can play quarterback 1 billion times better than I can. But to me, what I saw from Mason Rudolph in that year and how unlucky he was, and he'd had no quarterback coach and all those things. Like, I felt he was the better quarterback on that team when everyone around him operated well. I'm not saying he was flawless. I just thought he was the better quarterback on that team. And when I saw the Bills game live and I saw the quarterback level of quarterback play, I sat there and I was like, what the heck? And everyone around me, I had a guy next to me that had a Duck t-shirt on. He had the whistle, the Duck caller thing. And he turned to me and went, man, I love Duck. But I was complaining. I got pretty vocal about it. And I was like, man, I was ranting and raving kind of thing. And the bloke turned to me and he goes, man, trust me. I look like I love Duck. I love Duck. I love the idea of Duck. He's like, but you're totally right. He's like, I come to every home game. Mason Rudolph looks way better out here than Duck does. But putting that aside, because people have their good games and their bad games, everyone's a human being. I just felt like, and it was, in fairness to Tomlin, he couldn't have possibly predicted what I thought was an unfair hit, and we'll talk about unfair hits shortly. Unfair hit on Rudolph to concuss him. He would never have thought Myles Garrett would have started swinging, another bloke's helmet, at Mason Rudolph and all those sorts of things. But I guess I kind of felt like they should have said in that time, we drafted this guy we had a first round grade on, in the third round. Ben's got injured. We drafted him from this purpose. Ben, we pissed Ben off without bringing him in, which I think Ben could have been a little bit less touchy on that. But like, we brought this guy in. Let's see what he actually does. And as I said, obviously there was certain times of the season they had to pull him out, and they had to pull him out because BJ Finney doesn't know how to, keep his quarterback clean. But like, I've never felt that I didn't feel like Tomlin or the franchise sat there and said, Mason, this is your year, prove it kind of thing. And I felt like they should have done that. And so I'm hoping that, I guess, this season between Mason and Rudolph, because I know it sounds odd that I'm saying in 1 year, but make sure you commit to a backup. And this year I'm like, never commit to Trubisky. And that's because I think all the things you said and all the things that I stick by everything I said last year about Trubisky on different channels. But I think it is an interesting situation now because like when it comes to Mason Rudolph, it's a bit like the Kenny Pickett situation in a way because it's incomplete. You never know with what you would have got. And so I think it demonstrates why the OC that they go after is going to be absolutely crucial to this team's success. In fact, I personally think the quality of the OC is going to have a bigger bearing on this team's success over the next 3 or 5 years than maybe regardless of whether Tomlin stays the head coach, because they've just got to be able to score points. I mean, I'm sick of watching other teams score points. I feel like I've said this the whole time I've done podcasts and YouTube shows. I've said this, and I've only said it more and more and more. In the AFC, you have to score points. You cannot play quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and now Aaron Rodgers when he's fit and Lamar Jackson when he's fit and Tua with that team that he's got around him. And there's a bunch of other AFC teams. You've just got to be able to score points. You do. And this team doesn't do it. So I think those are interesting things. I wanted to, in this first show that we're doing this week, the other thing I wanted to get to is the Kazee hit. Now, the Kazee hit and the suspension. I can't believe, obviously he's got the 5 penalties for $59,000. This, he got fined $208,000. He got the 3 games, plus if the Steelers scrape through the playoffs, he's still banned for that. Tried to appeal it, that didn't work. His prior history got pulled up. I'm thinking if you've ever had a suspension before, in all of the Australian sport leagues, if you have the suspension, it wipes your point. They have points for fouls like this, and you get a certain points, it equals a certain number of games suspension. I think your points should be wiped. I think this is ridiculous. But ultimately, it's a big deal for the NFL. There's a lot of mixed opinion on this. Even Tom Brady's basically defending Kazee with what he said. How do you feel about it as someone that's watched, literally decades of football? How are you left feeling about this? Because to me, it's just a football injury, or it's a football play, I should say.
Well, being older, when I started watching football, they had done away with clotheslines and certain things that in the 50s and 60s, that was putting guys in the hospital, and Don Meredith, about killed him in a game for the Giants, but you had guys like Ted Hendricks and for the Raiders that would wrap their forearms in plaster of Paris, and they would club guys in the helmet, across the helmet when they were pass rushing. You had the Oakland Raiders secondary of Atkinson and Tatum that were just headhunters. I mean, they hurt guys bad. And Daryl Stingley, of course, was paralyzed for life playing against them. My first article for Behind the Steel Curtain, when I first started, I submitted an article about CTE and the steps that the NFL, but football in general, from Pee Wee to, your junior high school, college, the levels they were doing with improving equipment, changing the rules to make it safer for the players. And I'm all for that within reason. If you have flag football, which I wrote an article about that the NFL, if they ain't careful, is going to become the flag football league, because you have a helmet and pads for a reason. And it is to offer you protection because it's a physical sport. Rugby, as we've talked before, is very similar, but they don't have pads. I was watching a match a while back, and they got their mouthpieces and, some stuff like that to protect their ears sometimes. But it's, they don't have all the pads and equipment that the NFL players have. And it's ever been as rough.
Well, you talk about going back to years ago with the plaster of Paris. There was a guy doing that in the mid-2000s in rugby.
Oh, gosh. I wouldn't have wanted to play him. But me and you have talked before that rugby guys don't use the top of their head because they don't have the helmet. And that is, you're going to knock yourself out or hurt yourself real bad and others. So, but on Kazee's hit, if you watch, as a defensive back, you're supposed to not let that guy catch that ball. So if he dives head first to try to intercept the ball or to knock the ball away, you're going to have a worse collision. Much worse. So what he did is he went down to his knees and waited for him to come to him. If you watch, because he slowed his momentum and literally turned his shoulder. No part of the helmet did he use. He turned his shoulder and Pittman come into him. So the main force was Pittman's momentum. But he didn't try to hurt him. He didn't try to blow him up and make a highlight reel hit. Steelers are famous for that. Ryan Clark halfway give McCaffrey for the Ravens an out-of-body experience in that playoff game. There's been other incredible hits from the Steelers safeties. That's not what Kazee did. No. I actually thought he showed restraint and played the proper form by dropping his shoulder and letting the player's momentum dislodge him from the ball. Well, so I think the suspension is absolutely ridiculous. It really impacts the Steelers for the rest of the season because you lose your starting safety. And I don't think it's actually fair to Kazee, because when you have a guy like Tom Brady, who if you touched him, he was looking for a penalty. And even he's saying, what's the defender supposed to do? Gronk came out this week, Gronkowski, and he said the same thing. I'm all for protecting the players. But again, it's like the hip drop tackle that they're wanting to ban and outlaw. You have these guys, man, they're not going down just because you grab a hold of them. You got to physically take them down. Now, if you pick a guy up and you pile drive him or body slam him like Turkey Jones did to Terry Bradshaw back in the day, guess what? You're going to get fined and thrown out of the game. So what guys do, guys grab a hold and then they drop their body weight to pull the guy down from the side. But now they want to take away that. How are you supposed to tackle somebody?
So I want to unpack some of this as someone that played 12, 13, maybe more. Maybe my CTE is in play, but 13 seasons of rugby, right? One, hip drop tackle is just a legitimate type of tackle, which actually also really protects a smaller player against a big player. That is physics. The other thing I've never understood, people make Kazee out to be this 210, 6'3" bruising safety.
No.
He's not that guy. I've said countless times all off season, everyone keeps talking about, oh, we've got a strong safety in Kazee. And I'm like, no, we don't. We've got a safety in Kazee. The guy's like 5'10", 11. He's like 175 to 8 pounds, right? Again, physics against Michael Pittman, who's 6'4" and about 215, 210, maybe, right? Like, let's bring that into play. We talked about the gear. You could wear a soft pad. So there's rules in rugby. You can't wear hard and plastic. You have to wear, it's got to have it's a certain amount of padding that you're allowed, and it's a certain amount of thickness. So you do see guys that have some level of shoulder pads. I had a bad shoulder, so I had a little bit of that. But, and I, one for a second, and people, like the regulars of listeners of the channel know that I'm all for helmets. I've got a freaking helmet behind me, right?
Yep.
But if you want to limit concussions, you take helmets out straight away. The studies are out on this, is that any type of helmet, including the soft ones in rugby, if you have a concussion inducing injury, the vibration that comes from having your head wrapped in something external rocks you to socks. And that's why with the quarterbacks and Kenny Pickett, we've seen a lot of this stuff about ones that protect the neck more, and that is because everyone's neck is designed to shock absorb. It's literally, let's kind of like, there's like a cheap tree roots going around it in terms of your head, and it's there to balance whether that goes back or it goes forward. And so I just say, I love the helmet look. The NFL can't go away from that. That's the brand. But why you commit to helmets? You can't sit there and say, and you're a contact sport, you've got to have a level of understanding that there is certain risk that you play the game. There's certain risk. Someone can go skiing down a mountain over the next few weeks, where in all the different mountains in America, fall over and get a concussion. My wife has had 3 concussions in her life. I think she's documented. I've had 2. I played rugby for 13 years. She skied, right? Like, and he's a very good skier at that. It's probably that's why, she's got concussions, because no one rockets down a mountain like she does, right? But like, I think this is an interesting situation that the NFL finds itself in. I also think it's interesting because I was listening to Mike Florio's book. And by listening, I got the audio book of it about a year ago, and he was talking about CTE and how under the collective bargaining agreement, the last one that was signed, effectively the NFL had ended all ability to sue them for CTE related injuries by the fact of they set aside something like $800 million for this on a collective bargaining agreement in the way they upgraded the retired players and veterans pensions, like veteran players pensions. And so I'm sitting here on the other side of the world, sitting here going, well, hang on, you're a contact sport and that's what you're known for. You literally have a smaller guy against a bigger guy. And I know that's not always the case. I know angles and speed and all that's important, but you've got a guy that clearly didn't go out there to injure him. You've then got the situation where, from the CTE perspective, that's not really a thing anymore. I mean, obviously it's a thing, but I mean, it's a thing that's not going to damage your business that way. They're obviously feeling pressure because they don't want people injured on the sideline. But there are other things you can do around the game, like when Shazier injury happened. Now, I want to go deeply into that. I know it was like very much wrong place, wrong time. He did dip his head. You can't expect to be perfect. I've dipped my head on a bunch of tackles, and I saw Shazier. I'm like, oh my God, think about all the times you dropped your head. But ultimately, like, technique is really, really important. But you can't go out there and suspend someone for the rest of the season. I don't like all the way that all of this prior stuff's come into play, because even Jaylen Warren this season has had absolute BS fines and penalties go on him for running the ball, like literally just running the ball. And I think the NFL's got a big problem on its hands, because, like, it's kind of like that. People watch football to watch a contact sport and to watch men go at it. That's why they watch it.
Yeah,
that is. You will love to see the touchdowns, but you love to see a touchdown because you love to see someone, smash through the line. You love to see a touchdown because there's skill there of the offense going up against the defensive line and someone else coming in to block. Like, it's always competitive, and that's what I love about the NFL. But you can't have this situation where someone goes and make a play. Like, if he got 1 week, I kind of go, look, I don't think he should have got ejected. I really don't think he should have got 1 week. Oh, well. But it's this 3 weeks, your season's over, you guys are done. I just think I can't understand it. I'm not for it. And it's not going to do, like, I find it funny too, because we're talking about a sport that is basically your national sport in many ways. It's what's identified as your national sport around the world. And how that this physicality and roughness is suddenly not accepted when you've got the popularity of things like UFC out there, right? Like, people want to see this stuff. It's not that people don't want to see it on their TV. They do, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I just think the NFL, I can't understand this. And it goes back to another narrative, which is these officials need to be full-time employed, have an academy like a lot of other sports around the world, and not be like, and actually understand how their decisions affect not just the outcome of like a situation in the game, the outcome of a game, but the game as a whole and how it is played. Because I don't think that's being thought about. And the product is
in
two
the
men
game,
tackling people.
In the game, when that happened, it was like all the penalties, they all threw the penalty flag, and then they didn't, review it and see what did happen in slow motion and everything like that. They ejected him immediately. I mean, I don't think that the ruling come down from New York, or I think they just made that call and ejected him immediately. And then as we sit and watch the replay, you're like, oh man, I mean, I don't know what else he could have done. He technically, they said that he could have avoided the contact. Why should he avoid the contact when he's setting up trying to dislodge the ball, because that's his job. Now, if his job was to assist him catching it, then you avoid the contact. But his job is to prevent the reception. And so he did it, and he did it in as safe a way as possible. Tackle football, by its very nature, will never be perfectly safe. But he did nothing.
But basketball's not perfectly. Basketball's
no
not perfectly safe.
Walking down the street's not perfectly safe. But what I'm saying is, he did nothing. If anything, the way he did that was fundamentally sound compared to the way it would have used to have been. Used to be somebody would went right for his head, and that's not what he did. And he did not initiate that contact. He received the blow, the force of the diving player. So, I just thought that was uncalled for. It really didn't make much of an impact on the game because the Steelers were just outplayed in every way. But it is going to impact the Steelers the rest of the season. It's going to impact Kazee's wallet. And
he's lost. I've calculated. He's lost almost a sixth of his salary this year due to penalties.
Yeah, but it's also going to impact the product on the field for the rest of the season.
Oh, big time.
Because if the worst thing that can happen is somebody hesitate, thinking, okay, if I go and I try to break this up, because you can't do that. You got to play instinctual. Everything's a split second. You can't. They act like that these guys can just make this decision in a millisecond. You can't.
I love the way you said that. Millisecond. I love that. Now, I know this is a topic that can just explode, but I do want to make sure, that we keep this one tight for listeners. But this week we've heard a lot from George Pickens and about George Pickens, and you and I talked a lot about Deontay, and I'm very clear with people. I don't think he should be here next year. And there'll be a video that comes out in the next couple of days on a key trade target that I think they should swap Deontay for, just in my humble opinion. But I guess my 2 cents on this was that, and I said this in a live that I did earlier in the week, if you think that George Pickens is someone that you want to invest in, you cannot have Deontay in the same locker room as him. That's just not going to, you're going to be on a hiding to nothing. But I'm kind of torn this week. I feel like some of the media have made a mountain out of a molehill with George Pickens. I think he should have blocked. I kind of like Jalen Warren's comments back, which was like, I would have blocked for him.
Yeah.
I really like that. But like, is this a bit of a storm in a teacup in some ways? Like, I feel like I listened to Brian Backo from the Pittsburgh Post Gazette on with Chris Carter, and he's going, that was my number one takeaway from training camp was the, George Pickens on the sideline and drama and this, that. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying that George Pickens didn't do that. I wasn't there. But I'm just like, can we let a young player develop who's 22? I'm sure with the things he said this week that Tomlin, I'm sure he's been, and we all know we say Tomlin's a player's coach, but like even Tomlin's going to sit back and go, like, especially with how hard Tomlin went at Broderick Jones and Benson earlier on in the offseason. Is it a storm in the teacup? Is it a mountain out of a molehill when it comes to George Pickens?
Well, I've said before, and I've started with Deontay Johnson. By his second season, I started to see some traits that, to me, the standard's been set for a Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver. And you could go down through the years since even before the 70s, but especially since the 70s. And the Steelers have multiple Hall of Fame receivers, multiple guys that are worthy of Hall of Fame, like Hines Ward, multiple guys that were Pro Bowl or All-Pro level, that were incredibly team-first, Steelers way players, that were physical, that blocked, that, give 110% every play. Even though the Steelers are notoriously a running football team, up to when Ben come along, then eventually that started to change with the killer bees a lot. They threw the ball more. But these guys, Swan and Starworth had games where they might have had 4 targets, 5 targets the whole game. And, I'm sure they complained. We've heard stories. They did it in the locker room. They did it off the field. They would say, hey, throw it to me, Terry. We understand, you're running however many routes or you're blocking through the whole game. You want some action. You want to show what you can do. Pickens, to me, the reason he fell to the second round, because the guy, you can just see him, he's an athletic stud. He would have definitely went earlier. But everybody, all the evaluations was about his character, mainly his maturity. Now, when he come out, I think he was 21. And
he's only just turned 22. So yeah, he was right. Yeah, it was about 20 going on 21. Yeah.
Yeah, he has some maturity issues. But the diva part is a real concern, because all the great receivers, we see what happened with AB. The diva nature comes out. But when it got worse and worse with AB, but he was the best receiver in football, bar none. I mean, he understood, if you throw me the ball 14 times, I'm going to get 14 catches and 200 yards. I mean, him and Ben was on that level.
Yeah.
Well, here you've got a new team, a young guy, young quarterback, and he's trying to display diva behavior already. And I'm all for him wanting to help the Steelers win. And but a lot of times, how much of it is he really wants to help the Steelers win, or how much of it is he's worrying about himself and his own production?
Yeah.
Because if it was just about the Steelers, then when Johnson caught his touchdown, first one in like 2 years, he would have been celebrating with Johnson and happy for Johnson, and he wasn't.
I know.
We've seen selfish behavior. Selfishness, the Steelers way, everybody's like, what's the Steelers way? To me, the Steelers way is always, it's a big thing. It's not just one thing. It's the Steelers are a family. There's a camaraderie. There's putting the team first and my teammates first and wanting to win at the highest level. And that encompasses a lot of things. Selfishness is like a cancer. We all are selfish and want to be able to show what we can do, and that's great. But when you let it, I said this about Juju Smith-Schuster. I really like Juju. But I think Juju never understood the difference in his brand, and that at times he put it above the Steelers brand.
Yeah.
And see, that was the problem. And Pickens, to say that he didn't block because he didn't want to risk injury, and it brought up what happened to Tank Dell. To me, that was it was dishonest.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, he didn't block because he just didn't block. I mean, he didn't try to tackle the interception either. I mean, we see, then he turns around. The day that he said that at practice, they showed everybody doing the four corners, and he was half-hearted through that. How are you ever going to improve your footwork and your timing if you're going to half-speed it? I almost said something else. If you're going to go half speed through your practice reps. So I don't want to overblow it and do hyperbole, but I do believe that he's an issue that is because he's not listening to Tomlin. Because it's not.
Is he going to listen to anyone though? Like, and I guess this is the TJ Watt comments with Rich Eisen, which is like these guys.
They see it. Watt sees it.
And so it's interesting, because I think I find out how many people have gone at Tomlin recently. And don't get me wrong, I think Tomlin has a lot of work to do. But when TJ Watt calls out a large part of the locker room as not listening, there's a difference between, and we're also talking about not practicing hard enough, and we're talking about how many third stringers and practice squad guys are playing meaningful minutes. Maybe I'm a Tomlin sympathizer by that all accounts, but like, I kind of give Tomlin a little bit of leeway on it because, like, just because people aren't listening to his message doesn't mean that they're the wrong people, right? Like, sorry, doesn't mean that he's the wrong coach. There are people in there that shouldn't be playing, like, really in the NFL.
When you've watched football, as long as I have, you have watched.
I'm separating that from George Pickens, though. I'm saying that's a different issue.
But I'm just saying that the message. That's what kills legendary coaches, and eventually they have to be replaced if they don't retire. Is that the message grows stale, and and also there's been a basketball coach that recently. I'd said for a couple of years he's a legend, but his message was not relatable to the young athlete.
Yeah.
As society changes, let's say, Bobby Knight back in his day was a great basketball coach. He got great results, but as time went by and societal changes happened, his technique from, he was military, and he was trying to do those same tactics were unacceptable and ineffective towards the end of his career. What Tomlin and the Steelers way is not as effective now because of free agency, because of all the player movement, because of so many of the modern athletes have been told since they were in 7th grade, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they've always been a superstar.
Yeah.
And when they get to the pros and they're just another player, they can't handle that. And they've been coddled. And now you're trying to, it's hard to, Tomlin treats his players like men.
Yeah.
But some of them aren't men yet.
Yeah. And this is why I don't disagree with you at all. But it's also why I feel like when I've heard someone this week in the Pittsburgh media say, well, you could bring in Frank Reich. I'm like, and he's going to be more relatable to these guys. Like, they need to go, if they're going to replace Tomlin, they've got to go after Tomlin 2.0, and it's got to be someone really young, and they've got to be on offense, not on defense this time.
Yes.
And
it's an offensive game, and they got to go young.
And what better time to do it when you've got Minka, TJ, and still Cam on the roster to give you got linchpins on the defense that you can go, guys, we're going to bring in another DC. We're going to run that, or we're going to run Terrell Austin for more, which I don't think they should do. We're going to run that. I'm going to let you guys do your thing. I'm going to make sure we score some points so you guys don't have to be on the field so damn long, right?
Yeah.
But that's going to wrap up the first show you're going to get from us this week. I love talking all ball with Shannon, as always. It is a global perspective. It's global because Shannon and I are on the other side of the world. But as Mike Tomlin uses the word as well, it's a macro perspective. But you'll also get a preview show for us for the Steelers versus Bengals. So stay tuned for that as that comes out tomorrow. As always, go Steelers.